Story 1. I matched with Marla on a rainy Tuesday. She had the kind of profile that made you pause. Just 3 photos, all slightly blurry. But something about her smile made me stop swiping. It wasn't a posed grin. It was soft, real, and maybe a little sad. Her bio just said, "Looking for something quiet." That resonated with me. I was coming off a year of chaos, job loss, a breakup, and one too many nights eating alone with the TV on in the background. We messaged for about a week. Marla typed in full sentences, no emojis. She responded thoughtfully, often with a delay that made it feel like she was actually thinking before answering, not just rushing through an endless queue of matches. That was rare. Our conversations circled around old movies, strange dreams, and the quietness of late nights. She seemed drawn to the same melancholic corners of life that I often found myself in. By the time she asked if I wanted to get coffee, I felt like I already knew her a little. Not everything, of course, but enough. She picked the place, a tiny, half-forgotten cafe on the edge of town. I'd never been there before, though I'd passed it once or twice. It always looked closed. When I pulled up that Saturday afternoon, the sky was overcast. The cafe had one dusty window and no customers inside. A bell chimed when I opened the door, and the air smelled like old wood and burnt espresso. Marla was already there, sitting at the corner table with her back to the window. She looked almost exactly like her photos, though maybe a little more tired. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, but the smile was the same, gentle, reserved. She said, and I nodded, brushing rain off my jacket. We talked for hours. I don't know how it happened. Time seemed to slow down in that place. The barista, a silent older man with headphones in, only looked up once when I ordered a second cup. Marla barely touched her drink. She just sat there, watching me with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable. But it didn't. Not exactly. What did unsettle me, though, was how little she revealed. I told her about my job, my childhood, my failed relationship. But every time I asked her something personal, she redirected the conversation. Always smoothly, never evasively. It took me over an hour to learn she had one sibling. And even then, she didn't say if it was a brother or a sister. Eventually, I checked the time and realized the sun had gone down. The place had no clocks, and outside, the street was nearly empty. "I should go," I said, and Marla tilted her head. "You could come to my place instead," she said, casually. "I live nearby, just a short walk." The way she said it wasn't flirtatious. It was almost neutral. Like she was offering me a glass of water. I hesitated. But something about the afternoon, how strangely comforting her presence was, made me agree. We walked in silence. The streets were quiet, and her neighborhood had a strange stillness to it. Every house we passed had its curtains drawn, no movement inside. She lived in a small, single-story duplex, the kind built in the 60s and barely maintained since. There were no lights on in the adjacent unit. Inside, her home was Spartan. One couch, one lamp, no television. The walls were bare, except for a single painting. Something abstract and red, like a wound frozen in brushstrokes. She offered me tea, then sat on the floor across from the couch as if she didn't want to sit too close. The lights flickered once, and I asked if she had a storm recently. No, she said. It just happens sometimes. We talked again, or rather, I talked about everything and nothing. At one point, I noticed she was staring at the window where a dark shape had flickered past the edge of the curtain. "Did you see that?" I asked. "What? Outside?" She didn't look. "Probably the neighbor's cat," she said, though I hadn't seen a single animal since we got there. I should have left then. Something about the room felt increasingly wrong. The air was too still. There were no sounds, no fridge humming, no pipes groaning. It felt like the entire place was holding its breath. Marla stood and walked to the kitchen, disappearing behind the wall. I sat there, clutching the lukewarm mug of tea, listening. But I didn't hear any cupboards opening, no water running, just silence. And then she said something, but not to me. It was a soft whisper, just loud enough to catch. "No, not yet." I froze. A second passed, then another. She reappeared, holding an empty glass. "You okay?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "Yeah," I said, standing. "Actually, I should get going. It's getting late." She looked disappointed, but didn't argue, just walked me to the door. As I stepped outside, I glanced across the street and saw a figure standing under a street lamp. Too far to make out details, but it was watching us. I looked back at Marla, but she didn't seem to notice. "Thanks for the tea," I muttered, backing away. She didn't respond, just closed the door. I drove home with my heart pounding the whole way, telling myself I was overreacting. But that night, I got a message from her. No words, just a photo. It was of me sitting on her couch, taken from the hallway. I stared at it for a long time, then blocked her and deleted the app. But it didn't stop there. For the next 3 nights, I got a call from an unknown number around 3 a.m. I never answered. No voicemails, just the ringing. On the 4th night, I stayed at a friend's place. The calls stopped. Weeks passed, then months. I never heard from Marla again. I told myself she was just weird, a little off. Maybe she thought the photo was funny. Maybe I had imagined the voice in the kitchen. But then, a few weeks ago, nearly a year later, I got a new match. Different name, different pictures. But the bio read, "Looking for something quiet." And the first message? "You came." Story 2. I used to believe I had a pretty solid radar for people. I work in security. I've handled enough weirdos and confrontations to know when someone's putting on a mask. But Emma slipped right through. We matched on a dating app I hadn't used in months. I'd reinstalled it one night out of boredom, after too much whiskey and not enough company. Her photos weren't flashy. In fact, they were oddly normal, like someone had taken them without her noticing. In one, she was reading a book on a park bench. In another, she was walking down a street, glancing off camera. The last one was of her in a kitchen, pouring coffee, mid-laugh. Something about those photos made her feel real, not curated like everyone else. It didn't even occur to me that she might not have taken them herself. She messaged me first. "You look like someone who doesn't like crowds." It was an eerie first message, mostly because it was spot on. We talked for nearly 2 weeks. Emma was funny, thoughtful, even a little philosophical. We had a shared fondness for silence, long walks, and old films. I liked that she didn't flood my inbox. Her replies were spaced out, like she had a life she wasn't tethered to her phone. That felt rare, refreshing. When we finally agreed to meet, she suggested her place, said she lived just outside the city, in a rural spot near a small town I'd never been to. I suggested we meet halfway instead. She pushed back, saying she didn't get out much and didn't like loud spaces. Fair. I didn't either. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Her directions came as a paragraph of text, not a Google Maps pin. That should have been a red flag. The instructions were detailed, overly so. Turn right at the second mailbox with the red flag down. Stuff like that. But I wrote it off as her being quirky. It was a long drive, almost 2 hours into a sparsely populated area where streetlights disappeared and cell service flickered into nothing. Her house at the end of a long gravel path, surrounded by trees so dense it felt like the road had been cut into the forest. I arrived just before sunset. Her house was modest, small porch, peeling white paint, and a single yellow light in the front window. The air smelled like pine and something faintly metallic. I remember checking my phone and seeing no service just as the front door creaked open. Emma stepped out barefoot, wearing a long gray sweater. She smiled, but didn't come closer. "You found it," she said. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. No GPS made it a bit of a scavenger hunt. She laughed softly and gestured for me to come inside. I hesitated at the threshold, not because I was scared, not yet, but because the silence out there was oppressive. Inside, the house was dimly lit, sparsely decorated. No photos, no electronics, no TV. The walls were lined with bookshelves, many of them empty. The windows were covered in thick, heavy curtains, even though the sun hadn't fully set. She offered me tea, and we sat in the living room on mismatched chairs. The house had a lived-in feel, but not a warm one, like someone had moved in a long time ago and stopped trying. We talked. Small talk at first, then deeper things. Regrets, dreams, childhoods. She told me she used to have a brother, but he disappeared when she was young. Her voice caught when she said it, like she hadn't spoken the words in years. I asked if there was a reason she lived so far out. She hesitated. I like quiet. The world's too loud, too watched. Watched? She smiled. You don't feel it? That was the first time I felt the unease. I asked if she had neighbors. She shook her head. Not anymore. We had dinner, something simple she'd made in advance. I barely touched mine. I kept thinking about how empty the house felt, how quiet the woods were. Every time I tried to steer the conversation back to normal things, music, travel, work, she redirected it, kept pulling us back into strange territory, memory, fear, isolation. At one point, I asked where the bathroom was, and she gestured down a hall. I passed 3 doors, one slightly ajar. Inside was a room filled with filing cabinets, dozens of them, metal, old, dented, the kind you'd see in an archive. No labels on the drawers, no dust either. I paused, staring at the room, when Emma's voice drifted down the hall. That's not the bathroom. I jumped. Right, I muttered, hurrying past. The bathroom was at the end. When I came back out, the door to the file room was shut. We sat again in silence for a while. She asked if I wanted to stay the night. That stopped me. I don't think so, I said carefully. It's a long drive, but I'll make it back. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave mine. You sure? Yeah. She walked me to the door. I stepped outside into the cool night air. Already halfway to my car when she called after me. Can I ask you something? I turned. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Why did you really come? I blinked. I told you, just wanted to meet. No, that's what you said, but not why you came. I didn't answer. Something about her tone, it wasn't accusatory. It was curious, detached, like she was asking a question she already knew the answer to. I got in my car and drove back down the gravel path, stealing one last glance at the house in the rearview mirror. The front light was still on, but Emma was gone from the porch. Halfway down the road, I realized I'd never heard any cars go by. No planes overhead, no animals, just me and her. That night, back home, I dreamed of filing cabinets, opening drawer after drawer to find photos. All of them of me. Eating, driving, sleeping. Photos I never took. I woke up in a cold sweat, checked my phone. Still, no messages from her. The app was gone from my phone. Not deleted, vanished. No trace in the app drawer, no history. I reinstalled it manually, hoping to find our chat history. Nothing. No record of Emma, no profile like hers. I tried searching the address she gave me. Google Maps showed the road, but no house, just forest. I drove back the next day, took the same roads, followed the same mailbox clues. The gravel path was there, but it ended at a chain-link gate locked with rusted wire. Beyond it, trees. Nothing else. No house, no porch, just woods stretching endlessly in every direction. I stood there for a long time, the cold creeping under my jacket. I remember feeling watched. Not in the paranoid sense, but something deeper. Like the woods remembered me. I never went back. But months later, I was on my work laptop, filing security reports. We just upgraded to a new system that scanned facial data from our building's security footage. As a test, I ran it against some archived images from our lobby, just to see how well it picked up repeat visitors. On a whim, I uploaded a blurry image of Emma's face, taken from a screenshot I'd saved early on from the app. Back when I still thought she might be something real. The system flagged it. 4 matches, same woman, same face, entering our building on 4 separate days over the last 3 years. Always alone, always in early morning hours, never signed in. She wasn't an employee, wasn't in any records. She hadn't come to meet me. She'd already seen me. Since then, I've moved cities, changed jobs. But sometimes I think about that room of filing cabinets, about what might have been inside, about how many drawers had names and how many are still waiting for one. Story 3. I wasn't even supposed to be on dating apps anymore. After my last relationship imploded, 2 years ended in silence and blocked numbers. I told myself I'd stay off them for good. But loneliness is a tricky thing. It doesn't shout, it whispers, slowly, over months. Eventually, it convinced me to download one of the lesser-known apps. Not Tinder or Bumble, but one of those niche ones that advertise themselves as deeper, more introspective. A place for people who crave connection. That's how I met Lane. He didn't look like most of the guys on the app. No gym selfies, no photos with cars or groups of indistinguishable friends. His profile picture was black and white, just him sitting in a booth at a diner, looking straight into the camera like he was listening to you. His bio said, "It's hard to be a real person here. I'm trying." We matched the same day I signed up. His messages were careful, thoughtful. Every word felt like it had weight. He asked questions that weren't lazy or performative. They were specific. He'd read my profile, asked me about my job as a remote medical transcriber, even brought up a book I'd listed that hardly anyone had heard of. Lane didn't text often, but when he did, it never felt like filler. I'd wake up to a message at 3 a.m. about a dream he had, or a memory from when he was 10 and swore he saw someone living in the crawl space of his grandmother's house. His stories were always tinged with melancholy. He said he hadn't been sleeping well, that he felt like he was drifting through someone else's life. I should have recognized the red flags, but I didn't. Or maybe I did, and I just ignored them because I was tired of empty silences and even emptier conversations. We talked every day for almost a month before he suggested meeting. Just a walk in the park, followed by coffee. We met on a Sunday, just before dusk. The air had that cool, late winter bite to it. I spotted him standing under a tree, hands in his coat pockets, looking exactly like his photos. Messy brown hair, tall, wire thin, a little haunted around the eyes. "Hey," I said. He looked up and smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it reached his eyes. "Hi." We started walking. The park was mostly empty, just us and a few joggers in the distance. He was quiet at first, not awkward, just present. Eventually, we talked about memory, the weird disconnect between online selves and real selves, how silence feels heavier with some people than others. After about an hour, we sat on a bench near the edge of the park. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows through the bare trees. "That one," he said suddenly, pointing at a small house across the street. "That used to be mine." I followed his gaze. The house was small, yellowed, with boarded-up windows and a collapsed front porch. "You grew up there?" He nodded. "Till I was 10. Then something happened and we left." "What happened?" He hesitated. "I used to hear someone in the walls." I thought he was joking. "You mean like rats?" "No. Talking. Breathing. They knew my name." "Did your parents hear it?" "They said I was imagining things. Until my dad heard it too. One night, it said something about him. Something only he would have known." We moved the next morning. I didn't know what to say. "Do you ever go back?" "I came once, a few years ago," he said. The door was open, so I walked in. There was a man in the hallway, just standing there. Didn't move, didn't say anything, but I knew he'd been there the whole time. "That's a little too good for a ghost story," I joked. "I never said he was a ghost." A long silence passed. We changed the subject, laughed about something stupid, said goodbye. He hugged me and said he'd text later. He didn't. The next day, nothing. I messaged him, no response. Checked the app. His profile was gone. Not unmatched, gone, like he'd never existed. I told myself he'd ghosted me. People do that. But it didn't feel like that. Not with Lane. A week passed. Then I got an email. No subject line. One photo attached. It was me, at the park bench. From behind. Lane wasn't in the frame. The timestamp said it was taken 2 minutes before I arrived. I reported it, anonymously. Said someone was stalking me. The police sent someone, took notes, but with no name, number, or address, there wasn't much they could do. A few nights later, I heard footsteps outside my window. I live on the second floor. It was 2:00 a.m. I just turned off the TV. I heard pacing, measured, deliberate. I turned off the lights and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. The next morning, I found a fingerprint on the window, dragged downward. I took a photo and wiped it off. Then came the laptop camera. 2 days later, while I was working, the green light blinked on. Just for a second, I slammed the lid shut. An IT friend checked everything. No malware, no remote access. Still, I changed my passwords and covered the camera. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Lane's voice, like he was only half here. Maybe he'd been watching me long before we met. Maybe the app wasn't real. Some trap. I couldn't prove any of it, but I started looking anyway. I returned to the park, walked the same path, stood at the same bench, looked across the street. The house was gone. Not demolished. Gone. No lot. No debris. Just a fenced field of dry grass. I asked a man walking his dog if there'd ever been a house there. Been empty as long as I've lived here. 10 years, maybe. At home, I examined the photo's raw data. Embedded in the code was a single line. 37.7749 degrees north. 122.419 degrees west. Coordinates. I looked them up. They pointed to a storage facility on the city's outskirts. I didn't go. I wanted to, but something told me that if I did, I wouldn't come back the same. Maybe not at all. I sent the coordinates to the police. Anonymously again. I never heard back. The app's gone now. Not just off my phone. Gone from the store. I found message boards. People telling similar stories. Meeting someone who vanishes. Photos. Fingerprints. A feeling like being seen by something that shouldn't be watching. Each story's different, but the tone's always the same. Like something's testing the edge of intimacy, seeing how close it can get before we break. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, sure someone's watching. Not from outside, from inside. Like the air's holding its breath. But that's not the worst part. Not the photo, not the footsteps, not even the camera light. The worst part is that I miss him. Lane, whatever he was, he saw me. Not the curated profile or the careful words. Me. And some nights, when the room is too quiet and the shadows feel too still, I find myself whispering his name. Not out of fear, out of longing. Because whatever Lane was, he knew how to be present. And deep down, I think he still is. Story 4. I never liked the idea of blind dates. Dating apps, in a way, were the same, just dressed up with filters and algorithms. But after my divorce, and a year of feeling like I was watching life from behind a pane of frosted glass, I gave in. Not out of desperation, exactly. Just this sense that the longer I waited, the less connected I felt to anything remotely human. I downloaded an app called Glimpse. It wasn't very popular, which I liked. Fewer bots, less pressure. It had a minimal interface, and one feature that caught my eye. You couldn't message first. The app sent you a random glimpse of someone. A single line from their profile, no photo. And if you both liked what you saw, it would open the conversation window. That's how I met Eve. Her line said, "Sometimes silence says more than words ever could." It didn't seem particularly original, but it caught me off guard. It was simple, strange. I swiped right. An hour later, we matched. Eve was beautiful. Not in the airbrushed way most people presented themselves. She looked candid, off guard. Her first picture was of her in a laundromat, mid-laugh, hair in a messy braid. The second was a grainy Polaroid of her sitting on a rooftop, looking out over what might have been an industrial part of town. We started talking that night. Her messages were restrained at first, polite, but never cold. It felt like she was holding something back. Not secrets, necessarily, but density. Like if she let too much of herself out too fast, it might overwhelm me. And I liked that. We kept our chats within the app for a while. She never offered a number, said she preferred the space the app gave, said it felt unreal enough to be honest. It was Eve who suggested meeting after about 3 weeks. She proposed something different. Not coffee, not dinner, a private art exhibit. She said it was hosted by a friend of hers, a converted warehouse used for small, invite-only showcases. It's strange, she wrote, but I think you'd like it. It's hard to explain, but I want you to see it. The warehouse was on the edge of the city, nestled between an old furniture wholesaler and a fenced-off construction site. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The night of the exhibit, I parked a few blocks away and walked. It was already dark. The streetlights in that area buzzed more than they glowed, and the warehouse had no visible signage, just a black door with a small brass plaque, threshold. I hesitated, then knocked. Eve answered. In person, she looked exactly like her photos. If anything, more real. Not conventionally made up or overly styled. She wore a black turtleneck, sleeves pushed to the elbows. Her smile was warm, but brief. I'm glad you came, she said. She led me through the door, into a hallway lit by small, hanging bulbs. It was quiet. The walls were painted a soft gray, the kind that absorbs sound instead of reflecting it. I could hear our footsteps, my own breathing. I'm warning you, she said over her shoulder. This exhibit is unusual. How so? You'll see. We turned a corner, and suddenly there were other people. About a dozen, maybe more, all standing in front of blank walls. Not white, blank. No texture, no framing. Each person stared silently, as though there were something in front of them only they could see. Eve motioned me toward an empty space on the far wall. Just stand here, she said. Don't look away. I waited for her to laugh, to break the tension. She didn't. I looked at the wall. It was nothing. Off-white, maybe beige, smooth. I stood still, awkward, and felt ridiculous. But Eve stood nearby, watching me. And then it began to change. The wall. It didn't move or ripple. It didn't become a screen. But slowly, softly, almost imperceptibly, it became a memory. My memory. I don't mean it showed me a video or played audio. I mean I felt it. Like stepping back into a forgotten dream. It was my father's office. The way it looked the day I snuck in and found his letters, back when I was 13. The paperweight, shaped like a lion. The smell of stale tobacco. the faint hum of his desk fan. All of it. Exactly as it was. I blinked, looked away. The wall was blank again. I turned to Eve. "What is this?" She didn't answer, just stepped beside me and said, "Don't stop. You have to see it through." So I turned back. This time, the scene was different. A hallway, narrow, carpeted, lit by harsh fluorescence. It took me longer to recognize it. A motel from years ago, after my mom died. I'd holed up there for days, not talking to anyone, leaving the TV on static, just to feel like something was still alive in the room. The wallpaper was the same, peeling floral, the buzzing fridge, the scratchy wool blanket. I took a step back. "What is this?" I asked again. "You're seeing yourself," Eve said, "like we all do, eventually." I looked around. The others were still there, still staring, still motionless. I wanted to leave, but I didn't. Something had caught me. Not wonder, not awe, recognition. The next image wasn't a memory. It was now. Me, standing in front of the wall. Except the version of me wasn't moving. It stood there, still as a mannequin. Blank expression, eyes unfocused. I reached out to touch the wall, and for a split second, the hand in the reflection moved a beat too late. I recoiled. That's when Eve stepped closer. "Everyone sees the same thing. Eventually," she whispered. "What's that?" I asked. "Something they left behind, or something that left them." Her voice had shifted, quieter, almost reverent. I turned to her. "Is this real?" She smiled. "Does that matter?" I left not long after. Eve walked me to the door. We didn't kiss, didn't hug. She just looked at me and said, "You'll start to notice it now. It lingers." I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head. That night, I had the worst sleep of my life. Not nightmares, static, white noise. I'd close my eyes and see that motel room, or the office, or worse, the blank version of myself, staring at something just out of view. The next few days were uneventful. No messages from Eve. I checked the app. Her profile was gone. Not unmatched, not deleted, just wiped. When I went back to the warehouse, the black door was sealed with police tape. I asked a nearby shop owner what happened. He frowned. That place, been shut for years, used to be a textile plant. Fire gutted it, never reopened. I showed him a photo I took of the brass plaque. He squinted. "You sure that's from here?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly and walked away. I stood across the street for a long time. The door didn't look familiar anymore. No plaque, no lights, just a cracked slab of concrete and rusted hinges. But I swear, I could feel someone standing just behind it, watching. Over the following week, I started seeing reflections that didn't match my movements. In mirrors, in windows. The delay was tiny, fractional, but it was there. My expression would shift a second too late, or my blink wouldn't line up. I stopped sleeping. One night, around 3 a.m., I sat in my living room, staring at my TV, turned off. My reflection stared back, but the face didn't look like mine anymore. It looked like the version of me I saw in the wall. Blank, pale, detached. I got up and smashed the TV with a lamp. That's when the letters started coming. Not emails, physical letters. Handwritten, no return address. The first was a single sentence. You're almost there. The second, a few days later. The mirror remembers. I called the police, filed a report, but without a suspect or proof or a threat, they couldn't do anything. So I started cataloging. Photos, recordings, descriptions of the things I saw. But nothing ever showed up in the recordings. Only I could see it. Eve appeared again 2 months later. She was standing across the street from my apartment when I came home from work. Same black turtleneck, same braid. I crossed the street. You left, I said. I had to. Why? Because you weren't ready. But you are now. For what? To go further. I hesitated. I don't want to see the wall again, I said. She looked at me and her face softened. You've been seeing it everywhere. You just don't realize it. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to. I could feel it behind me. Beneath the surface of every reflective object, a waiting stillness. What happens if I go further? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Do you trust me? She asked. I don't know why I said yes. She led me to a building I'd never seen before. Despite walking that street for years, a gray tower, no windows, just a single narrow entrance. Inside was an elevator. We rode in silence. 10 floors, then 12, then 20. No buttons. When it stopped, we stepped out into a white corridor. At the end was a single door, cracked open. Eve turned to me. Whatever you see, don't speak. Don't touch anything. Just watch. I walked inside. There was no art, no wall, just a room filled with people, sitting in chairs, silent, staring ahead. At what? I couldn't say. The front wall was blank, but the air was heavy, charged. I sat and I waited, and then I understood. We weren't watching something. Something was watching us. It's hard to explain. A feeling of being cataloged, measured, not judged, not in the moral sense. More like how a scientist might observe a rat. Cold, detached. I looked to my left. Eve was gone. I looked to my right. The man beside me was weeping silently. I stood to leave, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, not paralyzed, held. And then the wall began to ripple. Shapes emerged, familiar, intimate. Every version of me I'd ever buried. The liar, the coward, the one who ignored every instinct, screaming not to follow Eve to that warehouse. They smiled. All at once, I blacked out. When I came to, I was in my apartment. On the floor, The clock read 3:03 a.m. There was a note in my hand. "You did well. We'll come again soon." That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've seen dozens of people vanish. Not disappear, literally, but slip, just slightly, out of sync. Their reflections don't line up. Their voices lag by half a breath. I think we're being replaced. One by one. I don't know who "we" is, or why, or how, but sometimes I still get letters. Always handwritten. No return address. The last one read, "You're not the first to see behind the wall, but you may be the last